Ruth Callahan's hands trembled as she lifted the loose floorboard in the child's bedroom. Hidden beneath lay a crumpled newspaper. No job posting existed. 4 words were scratched into the wood in a child's desperate handwriting. Please don't leave me. She wasn't hired. She was chosen. By a 7-year-old girl who hadn't spoken a single word in 18 months. If you're watching from somewhere in this world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Ruth's story travels. And if you believe some families aren't born, but built by the bravest hearts, stay with me until the end. Subscribe, and let's begin. The stagecoach driver didn't even wait for Ruth Callahan to gather her bag before he snapped the reins. Dust swirled, wheels creaked, and just like that, she stood alone on the edge of nowhere, watching her last connection to civilization disappear over the Montana horizon. Well, she muttered to no one, ain't this something? June heat pressed down like a hand on her chest. Her gray dress, the only decent one she owned, was already soaked through at the back. She picked up her canvas bag, the sum of 28 years of living, and started walking toward the ranch house, a quarter-mile up the dirt road. Each step kicked up dust that clung to her boots, her hem, her throat. She counted her steps to keep from thinking. 112, 113, 114. Don't think about St. Louis. Don't think about the blood on your hands. Don't think about running. The ranch house came into view, low-weathered, built from logs gone silver with age. Smoke rose thin from the chimney despite the heat. A barn leaned slightly to one side. A corral fence needed mending in at least 3 places she could see. Nothing about it looked like salvation. But Ruth Callahan wasn't looking for salvation. She was looking for survival. There was a difference. She climbed the porch steps and raised her hand to knock. The door swung open before her knuckles touched wood. A man filled the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered. Dark hair shot through with gray at the temples. His eyes, Lord, his eyes were the color of storm clouds, cold and distant as the mountains behind him. He looked at her the way a man looks at a bill collector. Miss Callahan. Not a question, a statement. Flat and final, as a coffin lid. Mr. Thornton. She kept her voice steady. I'm here about the cook position. I figured. He didn't move, didn't step aside, didn't offer welcome or water or rest. Just stood there blocking the doorway like she might try to steal something if he let her pass. You're younger than I expected, he said. I'm 28, sir. That single sound carried a world of doubt. Ruth felt her spine stiffen. She'd faced down drunks in St. Louis alleys. She'd survived her father's rages. She wasn't about to be dismissed by a man who couldn't manage more than 2 syllables. I can cook, she said. I can clean. I can keep house. I worked 6 years for the Morrison family in St. Louis. I have references. Don't need references. Then what do you need? Something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. Pain, maybe, or exhaustion too deep for sleep to touch. I need someone who won't run, he said quietly. First month. That's all I ask. Stay 1 month. After that, you're free to go, if it don't suit. Ruth met his gaze. Why would I run? He stepped aside, finally revealing the dim interior of the house behind him. You'll see. The kitchen was clean but cold, not temperature feeling. Every surface scrubbed, every pot in place, every dish stacked with military precision, but no curtains on the windows, no rug on the floor, no flowers in a jar, no sign that anyone actually lived here rather than simply existed. Samuel Thornton moved through the space without looking at it, pointing as he spoke. Stove. Works, but she's temperamental. Gotta know her moods. Wells out back. Root cellar under the porch. Meat smoked in the barn. We eat breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, supper at dusk. I ain't particular about what you cook long as it fills the belly. Ruth nodded, cataloging everything. I'll need to take inventory of supplies before. One more thing. He stopped. His back was still to her, his shoulders rigid as fence posts. My daughter, Grace. The name came out rough, like it scraped something raw on its way out. She don't talk much. Ain't spoken proper in a while. Don't take it personal. How long is a while, Mr. Thornton? Silence stretched. He didn't turn around. 18 months, he said finally. Since her mama passed. Ruth's heart clenched. 18 months of silence from a child. That wasn't grief. That was drowning. I understand, she said softly. No. Now he turned and she saw it. The guilt carved into the lines around his eyes, the shame he wore like a second skin. You don't. But you will. He left through the back door without another word. Ruth stood alone in the silent kitchen, listening to the clock tick on the wall. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. She looked up at the ceiling. I know you're there, she said quietly. You can come down when you're ready. I'll be here. The creaking stopped. Ruth smiled just barely and began rolling up her sleeves. She found the girl an hour later, or rather the girl found her. Ruth was elbow deep in bread dough when she felt that prickle at the back of her neck that meant someone was watching. She'd learned to trust that feeling in St. Louis. It had saved her life more than once. She didn't turn around, just kept kneading. I'm making bread, she said to the air. My mama taught me. She used to say you can tell everything about a person by how they treat bread. Patient folks make good bread. Angry folks make hard bread. Scared folks make bread that won't rise at all. Silence behind her. What kind of bread do you think I make? No answer. But the silence had a different quality now. Listening. You can come closer if you want. I won't bite. Can't promise about the bread, though. Bread's got a mind of its own. A soft footstep, then another. Ruth kept her eyes on the dough, her hands working steady and slow. In her peripheral vision, she saw a small figure edge into the kitchen. Blonde hair in 2 careful braids. A faded blue dress. And eyes. Lord help her eyes, the same storm gray as her father's, but older somehow. Ancient in a face too young to hold such weight. Grace Thornton clutched a worn book to her chest like a shield. Ruth's hands never stopped moving. That looks like a well-loved book, she said. Must be a good story. Grace's fingers tightened on the spine. She didn't speak, didn't nod. Just watched Ruth with an intensity that would have unsettled most grown women. But Ruth Callahan had learned long ago that children often saw what adults refused to see. That their silence usually spoke louder than words ever could. You know what my mama used to do while she made bread? Ruth asked. She'd tell me stories. Made up ones about girls who went on adventures. Girls who were scared but brave anyway. Girls who found their way home even when they were lost. She glanced sideways just briefly and caught something flicker across Grace's face. Interest, maybe, or recognition. Would you like to hear a story, Grace? The girl's breath caught audibly, like no one had asked her anything in a very long time. She didn't answer, but she took one step closer. Ruth smiled and began. Once upon a time there was a girl who lived by the sea. She had red hair wild as the waves and a heart too big for her chest. And one day, she talked while she kneaded, talked while she shaped the loaves, talked while she slid them into the oven. The story wandered and wound, full of mermaids and shipwrecks and a girl who refused to drown. Grace listened, still as stone, eyes never leaving Ruth's face. When the bread came out golden and steaming, Ruth cut a piece and held it out. Taste test, she said. You're the first. Grace hesitated. Her hand trembled as it reached out, then stopped inches from the bread. She looked up at Ruth with those ancient eyes, and for the first time in 18 months, Grace Thornton reached out and took something offered by a stranger. Supper that evening was the loneliest meal Ruth had ever experienced. She'd made stew, simple hearty, the kind that filled bellies without requiring conversation. She'd set the table for 3, lit a lamp against the gathering dusk, done everything proper. Samuel Thornton sat at the head of the table like a man facing execution. He ate mechanically, chewing without tasting, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the kitchen walls. Grace sat across from him, small and still, taking tiny bites that barely disturbed her plate. Her eyes moved between her father and Ruth, watching, measuring, waiting for something Ruth couldn't name. No one spoke. The clock ticked. Forks scraped. The silence grew teeth. Ruth had grown up with silences. The loaded silence before her father's rage. The empty silence after her mother's death. The cold silence of the Morrison house, where servants weren't meant to be heard. But this silence was different. This was the silence of people who had forgotten how to reach each other, who lived in the same house, but existed in separate worlds of grief. She understood suddenly why 4 women had come before her and left. It wasn't the work. It wasn't the isolation. It was this suffocating quiet that pressed down like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe, hard to remember that human connection was even possible. "The stew's good." Ruth nearly dropped her spoon. Samuel's voice was rough from disuse, but he'd spoken. Actual words, directed at her. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded once, went back to eating. But across the table, Grace's eyes had gone wide. She stared at her father like he'd performed a miracle. Then she looked at Ruth, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or hope. Ruth held Grace's gaze and smiled, just barely. The girl didn't smile back. But she took another bite of stew. And Ruth thought, this is where it starts. One word, one bite. One tiny crack in the wall. I can do this. I can stay. Damn. That night, Ruth couldn't sleep. The room they'd given her was small but clean. A narrow bed, a washstand, a window overlooking the dark prairie. Her bag sat in the corner, still packed, habit from years of never knowing when she'd need to run. She lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around her, the creak of old wood, the whisper of wind under the eaves. And somewhere down the hall, soft footsteps that paused outside her door. Grace. Ruth held her breath. Through the thin door, she could hear the child breathing quick, shallow, afraid. Should she open it? Call out? Or would that spook the girl? Send her scurrying back to whatever lonely corner she hid in? Before Ruth could decide, the footsteps moved away. She exhaled slowly. 18 months of silence. 4 women sent away. A father drowning in guilt. A child watching and waiting and testing. What had she walked into? She thought about the advertisement that had brought her here. Cook wanted. Isolated ranch. Room and board plus wages. Must be willing to work hard and ask few questions. She'd answered because she had no choice. Because St. Louis was burning behind her, and Montana was as far as her money could take her. Because beggars couldn't be choosers, and runaways even less. But now, lying in this strange bed, in this strange house, she wondered. Why had Samuel Thornton hired her? He'd said he didn't need references. Hadn't asked about her experience, her background, her reasons for being here. Just that one condition. Stay 1 month. Like he expected her to run. Like everyone did. Ruth rolled onto her side and stared at the wall. I won't run, she thought. Not this time. Not from this. Whatever secrets this house held, she would stay long enough to learn them. The next morning brought routine. Ruth rose before dawn, dressed in the half-light, and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was cold, the stove dead, but she coaxed it back to life with kindling and patience. By the time the sun crested the mountains, she had coffee brewing and biscuits in the oven. Samuel appeared exactly at dawn, as if summoned by some internal clock. He nodded at her, not unfriendly, just economical, poured himself coffee, and sat at the table. Grace usually comes down later, he said. She don't sleep well. Nightmares. He flinched, almost imperceptible, but Ruth saw it. Something like that. Ruth served him breakfast and took her own seat. They ate in silence, but it was easier today, less suffocating. as if last night's single compliment had loosened something. "I need supplies," she said when the plates were empty. "Flour's running low, could use more salt, some fabric for mending." "Make a list. I'll ride to town next week." "The mercantile is it far?" 12 miles. Mrs. Chen runs it. She's... He paused, searching for words. "She's good people. Fair." Something in his voice made Ruth look up, a softness she hadn't heard before. "Does she know Grace?" Ruth asked carefully. Samuel's jaw tightened. "She's one of the few Grace still tolerates. Visits when I bring her to town. Don't talk to her or nothing, but she tolerates." Ruth filed this information away. An ally. Someone Grace trusted. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "I could go to town with you. Introduce myself to Mrs. Chen. Get a feel for what supplies she has. Perhaps." But his tone had shifted, guarded now, like she'd stepped too close to something he wanted protected. Ruth didn't push. She'd learned that lesson too. Push a wounded animal, and it bites. Footsteps on the stairs interrupted them. Grace appeared in the kitchen doorway, her book clutched to her chest, her eyes finding Ruth immediately. "Good morning, Grace," Ruth said. "Biscuits are warm. Would you like honey or jam?" The girl's gaze flicked to her father, then back to Ruth. A question in those gray eyes. "Honey," Samuel said quietly. "She likes honey." Grace nodded, barely perceptible, but she came to the table, sat in her chair, let Ruth place a biscuit on her plate and drizzle it with honey. "There," Ruth said. "That's how my mama used to make them. She said honey was sunshine you could eat." Grace's hand hesitated over the biscuit. Then, wonder of wonders, she picked it up and took a bite. Samuel watched his daughter like he was witnessing a resurrection. His throat worked. His eyes grew bright. Ruth pretended not to notice. She understood about pride. About not wanting your weakness witnessed. "More coffee, Mr. Thornton." He nodded, not trusting his voice. And Ruth poured, and Grace ate, and the morning sun crept across the kitchen floor, turning dust motes to gold. The first week passed in small victories. Grace came to the kitchen every day now, always with her book, always watching. She didn't speak, didn't help. But she was present, and Ruth understood that presence was its own kind of communication. Ruth talked while she worked, stories mostly. Tales her mother had told her, adventures she invented on the spot. She never asked Grace to respond. Never pushed for words or smiles or acknowledgement. But on the 4th day, Grace moved her chair closer to the table. On the 5th day, she set down her book. On the 6th day, she reached for a wooden spoon when Ruth wasn't looking, and stirred the soup. Ruth saw it, said nothing. Just handed her a bowl to taste. Grace tasted. And for half a second, that Ruth would remember for the rest of her life, the ghost of a smile crossed that solemn little face. It vanished immediately, replaced by the careful blankness Grace wore like armor. But it had been there. Ruth had seen it. That night, she wrote a letter to no one. Just words on paper to organize her thoughts. "The child is testing me. I understand tests. I have been tested all my life. The question is, what happens when I pass?" On the 7th morning, Ruth woke to find a flower on her windowsill. A wildflower, purple, half wilted from the heat, but carefully placed stem tucked into a crack in the wood to keep it upright. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she dressed, went downstairs, and found Grace already in the kitchen, standing very still by the stove, her eyes fixed on Ruth's face, waiting. Ruth smiled. "Thank you," she said simply. "It's beautiful." Grace's chest rose and fell with quick breaths. Her hands twisted in her dress. She nodded once, just once. But Ruth heard it as clearly as if she'd spoken, "You're welcome. You're welcome. Please don't leave." The first crack in the mystery came 3 days later. Ruth was cleaning Grace's room while the girl played outside with the barn cats. She'd made the bed, swept the floor, and was just about to leave when she noticed a loose floorboard near the window, slightly raised from its neighbors. She knelt down. Her fingers found the edge. Lifted. Beneath was a small hollow space, a child's hiding place filled with treasures. A bird's feather, 3 smooth stones, a faded ribbon, a piece of paper covered in a child's careful handwriting, and a folded newspaper clipping dated 3 months earlier. Ruth's hands trembled as she unfolded it. She scanned the columns. Farm equipment, livestock, land sales, employment advertisements. Her breath caught. There was no listing for a cook at Thornton Ranch. She read again, twice, 3 times. Her heart pounded against her ribs. No advertisement, no posting, nothing. If Samuel Thornton hadn't placed an ad, then how? Her eyes fell on the paper covered in writing. She picked it up. The words were uneven, some letters backward, written by a hand still learning its craft. Not her. She was mean. Not her. She cried too much. Not her. She didn't like me. Not her. She wanted Papa, not us. And at the bottom, in larger letters, Ruth Callahan. Red hair. Alone. Needs home. This one. Ruth's vision blurred. She sat back on her heels, the papers clutched in her shaking hands, and understood. There had been no job. Samuel Thornton hadn't hired her. His 7-year-old daughter had. She found Grace by the barn sitting in the dust with a tabby cat in her lap. The girl looked up as Ruth approached. Her face went pale. She knows, Ruth thought. She sees that I know. Ruth sat down in the dust beside her. The cat mewed and stretched. The afternoon sun beat down on both of them. Grace, Ruth said quietly, I found your hiding place. The girl went rigid. Her hands froze on the cat's fur. I found the newspaper. And your list. Grace's breathing turned quick and shallow. Panic flickered in those gray eyes, the terror of being caught, of being punished, of losing something precious. I'm not angry, Ruth said. I need you to hear that. I'm not angry, Grace. The girl stared at her, disbelieving. But I need to understand. Will you help me understand? For a long moment, nothing. Then Grace reached into her pocket and pulled out a stub of pencil. She looked around, found a flat rock, and began to scratch letters into the dust. Mrs. Chen helped Ruth read the words. Mrs. Chen, at the Mercantile. A nod. She helped you find me. Send for me. Another nod. Why me, Grace? There must have been others. Why did you choose me? The girl's pencil moved again, slower this time. Alone like me. Ruth's heart cracked clean in half. Oh, sweetheart. Grace looked up and her eyes were full of tears she wouldn't let fall. No family, she wrote. Needs home. Won't leave because nowhere else to go. Ruth read the words and understood. This child had done the math with brutal, heartbreaking clarity. She'd looked at dozens of applicants and chosen the one least likely to leave. The one with nothing to lose. The one who needed this as much as Grace did. Does your papa know? Violent headshake. Grace, he'll send you away. Please, please don't tell. The words were frantic now, pressed deep into the dust. Ruth reached out and stilled the girl's hand. Look at me, she said. Gray eyes met green. I'm not going to tell your papa, not yet, not until we figure this out together, but Grace, you have to understand something. She waited until she had the child's full attention. I'm choosing to stay now. Not because I have nowhere else to go, not because I'm desperate or trapped. I'm choosing this. You, your papa, this ranch. I'm choosing all of it. Grace stared at her. Do you understand? Whatever happens, whatever anyone finds out, I'm staying because I want to. Because you matter to me. Because this place already feels more like home than anywhere I've ever been. A tear slipped down Grace's cheek. Then another. Is that okay? Ruth whispered. Can I stay? Grace launched herself forward, arms wrapping around Ruth's neck, face buried against her shoulder. And Ruth held her, this small, fierce, desperate child who had searched the world for exactly the right person and found her. "I've got you," she murmured into Grace's hair. "I've got you now. I'm not going anywhere." Above them, the Montana sun blazed in a cloudless sky. In the barn, the horses stamped and snorted. Somewhere in the house, Samuel Thornton moved through his grief-darkened world, not knowing that everything was about to change. But Ruth knew, and Grace knew, and for now, that was enough. The days that followed Grace's confession settled into something Ruth hadn't expected: a conspiracy of silence between a woman and a child bound by secrets neither dared to speak aloud. Every morning, Ruth woke before dawn. Every morning she found a small gift on her windowsill. A smooth stone, a hawk feather, a sprig of wild sage. Grace's wordless offerings, her way of saying, "You're still here. Thank you for staying." And every morning Ruth tucked the gift into her pocket and carried it with her through the day. Samuel noticed nothing, or if he noticed, he said nothing, which amounted to the same thing. He moved through the ranch like a ghost, haunting his own life present, but not there, breathing, but not living. But Ruth watched him. She watched the way his eyes lingered on Grace when he thought no one was looking, the way his hands trembled when he passed his daughter's empty chair, the way he stood sometimes at the kitchen window, staring at nothing, lost in memories too painful to share. He loved his daughter. That much was clear. He just didn't know how to reach her anymore. 2 weeks into her time at Thornton Ranch, Ruth decided it was time to push. She found Samuel in the barn mending a harness with hands that moved from muscle memory alone. He didn't look up when she entered. "Mr. Thornton?" "Miss Callahan." She moved closer, watching him work. "I'd like to take Grace to town next week, when you go for supplies." His hands stilled. "Why?" "She needs to see people, other faces. She can't heal in isolation. She sees people. She sees you. She sees me." "That's not enough, and you know it." Now he looked up, and his gray eyes were hard. "You've been here 2 weeks, Miss Callahan. 2 weeks. You don't know what's enough for my daughter. I know she hasn't spoken in 18 months. I know she watches you like she's waiting for you to disappear. I know she's drowning, and you're too busy drowning yourself to throw her a rope." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. She saw them land like blows, watched Samuel's face go white, then red. "You got no right." "I've got every right. You hired me to care for her." "I hired you to cook." "Then fire me." The challenge hung between them. Samuel's jaw worked. His hands clenched on the harness leather. "Go on," Ruth pressed. "Fire me. Send me away like you sent the others. Prove to Grace that everyone leaves eventually. Prove that she's right not to trust anyone." "That ain't fair." "Neither is watching a child drown and doing nothing about it." Samuel surged to his feet. For one heartbeat, Ruth thought he might strike her. He was close enough, angry enough. She'd seen that look before in her father's eyes, in the eyes of Morrison's son, before she'd fought back. But Samuel Thornton didn't hit her. He stood there, fists clenched, chest heaving, and Ruth saw it, the war inside him. Rage, fighting with grief. Pride, fighting with shame. "You think I don't know?" His voice cracked. "You think I don't see what I've done to her? I lost my wife. I lost my son. And then I lost my daughter too, inch by inch, day by day, and I couldn't stop it. I tried. God help me, I tried." Ruth's anger softened. "How did you try?" "I hired women to help. Good women, kind women. But Grace—" He turned away, one hand pressing against his eyes. "She drove them all out. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't sleep. Cried until they couldn't take it anymore. 4 women in 1 year, Miss Callahan. 4 women who came here wanting to help and left in tears." "What made them leave, really?" "I told you. Grace. Grace is 7 years old. She doesn't have the power to drive grown women away. Something else happened. Something you're not telling me. Samuel's shoulders slumped. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. The first one, Mrs. Patterson, she tried to throw away Emma's things. Grace caught her boxing up Emma's books, her sewing kit, her Sunday dress. Said it wasn't healthy to keep a dead woman's belongings around. Ruth's stomach turned. Good Lord. The second one wanted to send Grace to boarding school in Denver. Said a ranch was no place for a girl child. The third? He stopped, his jaw tightening. The third one wanted more than a cook's position. Made that clear enough. When I told her I wasn't interested, she said things to Grace. Cruel things. About her mother. About why Emma really died. And the fourth? The fourth just gave up. Said Grace was broken and there was nothing anyone could do. Packed her bags and left without even saying goodbye. Ruth absorbed this. 4 women. 4 failures. And Grace watching each one go, learning the same lesson over and over. People leave. Don't trust. Don't hope. Don't love. No wonder she'd taken matters into her own hands. She's not broken, Ruth said quietly. Samuel turned. Hope flickered in his eyes, desperate, dangerous hope. She's grieving, Ruth continued. Same as you. She just shows it different. But she's still in there, Mr. Thornton. Your daughter is still fighting to come back. I've seen it. You've seen it. Small things. She comes to the kitchen now, sits with me while I cook. Yesterday she stirred the soup. The day before she smiled just for a second, but I saw it. Samuel's face crumpled. He turned away again, but not before Ruth saw the tears he was fighting. Take her to town, Ruth said gently. Let me come with you. Let me show you what she's capable of, given half a chance. A long silence. Tuesday. Samuel said finally, his voice rough. We leave at dawn. Ruth nodded and turned to go. Miss Callahan. She paused at the barn door. What happened to you? Samuel asked. Before you came here, what did you run from? The question hit like a fist to the chest. Ruth gripped the doorframe, steadying herself. Everyone runs from something, Mr. Thornton. The question is whether we keep running or finally stop. She left before he could ask more. The morning of the town trip, Grace appeared in the kitchen wearing her best dress, faded blue, with white buttons carefully pressed. Her hair was braided tighter than usual, her face scrubbed clean. Ruth's heart ached at the effort. You look beautiful, she said. Grace ducked her head, but not before Ruth saw the flash of pleasure in her eyes. Samuel came in, hat in hand, and stopped short when he saw his daughter. Something crossed his face, wonder maybe, or the sharp edge of memory. You look like your mama in that dress, he said quietly. Grace went very still. Her eyes flew to Ruth, uncertain, afraid. That's a fine compliment, Ruth said smoothly. Your mama must have been lovely. The moment passed. Samuel cleared his throat, nodded once, and headed for the wagon. But Ruth had seen it the first time he'd mentioned Emma to Grace, in God knew how long. A crack in the wall between them, tiny but real. Progress. The ride to town took 2 hours. Grace sat between Ruth and Samuel on the wagon seat, small and silent, but present. She watched the prairie roll past her eyes, tracking hawks and antelope, her fingers tight around Ruth's hand. Ruth talked to fill the silence. Stories about St. Louis, the safe parts, the funny parts. The time she'd accidentally set fire to the Morrisons' kitchen curtains. The cat that had adopted her at the boarding house. Small things, meaningless things, but Grace listened. And once, just once, Ruth felt the girl's grip tighten in something like laughter. Samuel noticed. She saw his eyes flick down to their joined hands, saw something shift in his expression. Widow Chen's Mercantile stood at the edge of the town's main street, a weathered building with a hand-painted sign that read, Chen's Goods, Fair Prices, All Welcome. The moment they stepped inside, Grace released Ruth's hand and walked, not ran, but walked with purpose toward the counter, where a Chinese woman in a practical gray dress was sorting spools of thread. Well now. Mrs. Chen looked up, and her weathered face transformed with genuine warmth. Look who's come to visit. Grace stopped at the counter and stood very still watching. Mrs. Chen reached beneath the counter and produced a small paper bag. Peppermints, she said. Been saving them for you. Grace's hand crept out, took the bag, held it tight. You're welcome, Mrs. Chen said, as if Grace had spoken. Ruth watched this exchange with growing understanding. Mrs. Chen treated Grace like a normal child. No pity, no pressure, no theatrical concern. Just simple kindness, simply offered. You must be Miss Callahan. Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes found Ruth. I've heard about you. Have you? Small town, word travels. She glanced at Samuel, who was examining a display of tools with studied concentration. You're the fifth. So I'm told. Planning to be the last. Ruth met her gaze steadily. Planning to stay as long as I'm needed. Something flickered across Mrs. Chen's face, approval maybe, or assessment. Grace, she said, why don't you show Miss Callahan the fabric in the back? I just got a shipment from San Francisco. Pretty colors. You could help her choose. Grace looked at Ruth, a question in her eyes. I'd like that, Ruth said. I could use a new Sunday dress. They moved to the back of the store, leaving Samuel and Mrs. Chen at the counter. Ruth heard their voices low, careful, but couldn't make out the words. Grace led her to a shelf stacked with bolts of fabric. Her small hand reached out and touched a deep green cotton, then looked at Ruth. You think that would suit me? Ruth asked. A nod. Green's my favorite color. How did you know? Grace pulled a scrap of paper from her pocket. Ruth recognized it, the letter she'd written to secure the position, the letter that had supposedly been in response to an advertisement that didn't exist. Her own handwriting at the bottom. I particularly favor practical clothing in dark colors, green or gray, preferred. She'd forgotten she'd written that. But Grace hadn't. This child had read every word, memorized every detail. Chosen Ruth, not at random, but with the careful precision of someone who understood exactly what she needed. You really did pick me, Ruth whispered. Grace nodded slowly, solemnly. Why, Grace? Of all the people you could have chosen, why me? The girl reached into her pocket again. This time she pulled out a different letter, older, more worn. She held it out. Ruth took it carefully. The handwriting was different, elegant, refined. My darling Grace, it began. If you're reading this, then I've gone to be with the angels and you're missing me terribly. But I need you to know something important. Ruth's throat closed. This was Emma's letter, her final words to her daughter. She kept reading. You will meet many people in your life, sweetheart. Some will be kind, some will be cruel, and some will be so lost in their own pain they can't see yours. But every now and then, you'll meet someone whose hurt matches your own. Someone who understands without being told. Someone who stays, not because they have to, but because they choose to. When you find that person, Grace, hold on tight. They're the rare ones. They're the ones worth keeping. I love you forever and always. Mama Ruth looked up, vision blurred with tears. Grace pointed to herself, then to Ruth, then back to the letter. You think I'm that person? The one your mama wrote about? A fierce nod. Grace. The girl stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Ruth's waist, holding on with all her small strength. Ruth hugged her back, this child who had searched and tested and finally chosen, who had read her mother's words and believed them enough to act on them, who had looked at a desperate woman's letter and seen not weakness, but kinship. I'll try to be worthy of it, Ruth whispered into Grace's hair. I'll try so hard. They stayed like that until footsteps approached Samuel, coming to check on them. He stopped short when he saw them embracing. His face went through a series of emotions too quick to name. Everything all right? His voice was rough. Ruth stepped back, keeping one hand on Grace's shoulder. Everything's fine. Grace was helping me choose fabric for a new dress. Samuel looked at his daughter, at Ruth, at his daughter again. She hasn't hugged anyone since... He stopped, swallowed hard. Not since Emma. Ruth felt Grace press closer to her side. Maybe she just needed to find the right person, Ruth said quietly. The ride home was different. Grace sat between them as before, but now she leaned against Ruth's shoulder, exhausted from the day's emotions. The peppermint bag was clutched in one hand, still unopened, a treasure to be savored later. Samuel drove in silence, but it was a thoughtful silence now. Several times, Ruth caught him glancing at his daughter, at the way she curled trustingly against Ruth's side. Halfway home he spoke. "What did she show you in the store?" Ruth hesitated. The letter was Grace's secret. Emma's words for her daughter alone. "Something precious," she said carefully. "Something that helped me understand." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Understand what? Why I'm here. Why I need to stay." He was quiet for a long moment. "The other women," he said finally. "They never made it past the first week, not really. Grace would tolerate them for a few days then." He shook his head. "I thought she was being difficult. Thought she was punishing me for not saving her mother." "She was looking for something specific," Ruth said. "Someone specific. And she found it in you." It wasn't a question. Ruth answered it anyway. "I hope so." The ranch came into view golden in the late afternoon light. Grace stirred against Ruth's shoulder, but didn't wake. Samuel reined the horses to a stop outside the house, but didn't move to get down. "Miss Callahan." "Yes?" "The women before you, they asked questions about Emma, about how she died, about why Grace stopped talking." His hands tightened on the reins. "You haven't asked." "Would you answer if I did?" A long pause. "Probably not." "Then I won't ask." He turned to look at her, and for the first time, Ruth saw him clearly. Not the grief-frozen widower, not the distant father, but the man underneath. Tired, scared, trying so hard to do right and failing in ways he couldn't fix. "Why?" he asked. "Everyone wants to know." Ruth thought about it. About the questions she could ask, the secrets she could dig for. About the walls people built and the reasons they built them. "Because some things you earn the right to know," she said. "You don't take them. You don't demand them. You wait until someone trusts you enough to share." Samuel stared at her. "You're different," he said finally, "than the others." "I'm exactly what Grace was looking for." Ruth met his gaze. "Maybe that's different. Maybe it's just right." Grace woke as they lifted her from the wagon. She blinked up at her father's face, then at Ruth's, and for a moment looked confused, as if she'd expected to wake alone, abandoned back to the life she'd known before. Then she saw them both, and something in her relaxed. "Let's get you inside," Samuel said gruffly. "Past your supper time." He carried Grace into the house, and Ruth followed, and something had shifted between all of them, something she couldn't name, but could feel humming in the air, like the charge before a storm. That night after supper, Grace did something unexpected. She walked to her father's chair where he sat reading by lamplight and stood there until he looked up. "Grace." She held out her hand. In it was a peppermint from Mrs. Chen's bag. Samuel stared at the candy, then at his daughter. "For me." A nod. His hand shook as he took it. "Thank you, little bird." Grace flinched. Ruth saw it the way the old endearment hit her like a physical blow. "I'm sorry," Samuel said quickly. "I know you don't like—" But Grace was shaking her head. She grabbed her father's hand, the one holding the peppermint, and pressed it against her cheek, holding it there. Samuel made a sound like something breaking. He pulled Grace into his lap, wrapped his arms around her, and buried his face in her hair. His shoulders shook. Ruth stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her own face. 18 months. 18 months of silence and distance and walls built brick by brick. And here was Grace choosing to demolish them, one peppermint at a time. She started to slip away to give them privacy. "Miss Callahan?" Samuel's voice rough with tears. She turned. He was looking at her over Grace's head, his daughter still pressed against his chest. "Stay," he said. "Please." Ruth stayed. She sat in the chair across from them and watched as father and daughter held each other for the first time in 18 months. Watched as Grace's small hand patted Samuel's back, comforting him. Watched as he whispered apologies and promises into her hair. When Grace finally fell asleep in her father's arms, he didn't move to carry her upstairs. Just sat there holding her, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "I don't know how you did it," he said quietly. "I didn't do anything. She was ready. She's been ready for months. I just couldn't—" He shook his head. "I was too scared, too lost in my own pain to see hers. You see it now. Because of you." Ruth shook her head. "Because of Grace. She's the brave one. She always has been." Samuel looked down at his sleeping daughter. "She's so much like Emma. That stubbornness, that determination to fix things, even when they seem unfixable." "Tell me about her," Ruth said before she could stop herself. "About Emma." Samuel's eyes met hers. For a long moment, he was silent. Then slowly he began to speak. "She was a teacher when I met her. In Texas. I was still wearing a badge back then, Texas Rangers. Thought I was saving the world one outlaw at a time." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She walked into the sheriff's office one day mad as a wet hen because someone had stolen her students' lunch pails. Demanded we do something about it." Ruth smiled. "Did you?" "Spent 3 days tracking down a raccoon that had gotten into the schoolhouse. Emma said it was the finest law enforcement work she'd ever seen." "She sounds wonderful." She was. The smile faded. "She was everything good in my life. And when she died—" His arms tightened around Grace. "How?" Ruth asked gently. "If you want to tell me." Samuel was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "She was with child again," he said finally. "Grace was so excited. Wanted a sister, though she said she'd settle for a brother." His voice cracked. "Something went wrong. The baby came too early. Emma bled, and there was nothing I could do but hold her hand while she—" He stopped. Ruth waited. "Grace was in the next room," Samuel continued. "I didn't know. I thought Mrs. Chen had taken her to town, but she was there. She heard everything. Her mama dying, the baby crying, and then going silent. All of it." Ruth pressed her hand to her mouth. "She hasn't spoken since. Won't talk about it. Won't talk about anything. Just watches and waits and tests everyone who comes near looking for something she won't name." Looking for someone, Ruth thought. Looking for me. "I've blamed myself every day since," Samuel said. "If I'd gotten the doctor faster, if I'd insisted we move to town when she got pregnant, if I'd— You couldn't have saved her. You don't know that. I know that guilt will eat you alive if you let it. I know that Emma wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself." Ruth leaned forward. "And I know that Grace needs her father, the real one, the one who laughs and tells stories and calls her little bird, not the ghost who's been walking through this house for 18 months. Samuel flinched. "She gave you that peppermint because she's ready," Ruth continued. "She's ready to have her papa back. Are you ready to come back?" The question hung in the air. Grace stirred in Samuel's arms, murmured something unintelligible, and settled again. "I don't know how," Samuel whispered. "Then learn. One day at a time. One peppermint at a time." Ruth stood. "That's all any of us can do." She headed for the stairs, then paused. "Mr. Thornton." "Yes." "Thank you for telling me. About Emma. About Grace." He nodded slowly. "Thank you for listening." Ruth climbed the stairs to her room, but sleep was a long time coming. She lay in the darkness thinking about secrets and silence and the fragile threads that connected them all. Thinking about Emma's letter, Grace's choice, Samuel's grief. thinking about her own secrets still buried deep. St. Louis, the Morrison house, the blood on her hands. Someday she would have to tell them. Someday the past would catch up as it always did. But not tonight. Tonight was for healing, for hope, for the first fragile steps toward becoming a family. Ruth closed her eyes and let sleep take her. 3 days later, everything changed. It started with a letter. Ruth was clearing breakfast dishes when Samuel came in from the porch, his face pale as ash. "What is it?" He held out the envelope. His hand was shaking. Ruth took it, read the return address, and felt her blood turn to ice. Victoria Price, Denver, Colorado. "Who is Victoria Price?" Ruth asked, though something in her gut already knew the answer. "Emma's sister." Samuel's voice was flat dead. "Grace's aunt. And she's coming here, next week." He met Ruth's eyes, and she saw fear there, real naked fear. "She wants to take Grace." The letter lay on the kitchen table like a coiled snake. Ruth read it twice, her hand steady even as her heart raced. Victoria Price's handwriting was elegant, refined, each loop and curve perfectly formed. The kind of penmanship taught in expensive finishing schools. The kind that spoke of money, power, privilege. The words were worse. "Dear Mr. Thornton," Ruth read aloud. "It has come to my attention that my niece continues to languish in unsuitable conditions on your isolated property. As Emma's closest living relative, I have a moral and legal obligation to ensure Grace receives proper care, education, and society befitting a child of her background. I will arrive on the 15th to assess the situation personally. Please have Grace's belongings prepared for travel. Regards, Victoria Price." Samuel stood rigid by the stove, his jaw clenched so tight Ruth could see the muscle jumping. "She can't just take her," Ruth said. "Grace is your daughter. Victoria has lawyers, money, connections in Denver." Samuel's voice was hollow. "She tried this before, right after Emma died. Said I wasn't fit to raise a girl alone. Said Grace needed a woman's influence, proper schooling society. What stopped her then? Emma's will. She left everything to me, the ranch, the savings, and custody of Grace. Victoria contested it, but the judge ruled in my favor. Then she can't. That was 18 months ago." Samuel turned, and Ruth saw desperation in his eyes. 18 months of Grace not speaking, not eating properly, driving away every woman I hired to help. Victoria will say I've failed, that Grace is worse off now than she was then. Ruth's mind raced. Grace is better. She's eating. She's engaging. She hugged you 3 days ago. You think Victoria will care about hugs? Samuel laughed bitterly. She'll see an isolated ranch, a silent child, and a cook who's been here less than a month. She'll see exactly what she wants to see. Then we show her something different. How? Ruth didn't have an answer. Not yet. But she had 5 days to find one. She found Grace in this barn sitting in the hay with a tabby cat curled in her lap. The girl looked up as Ruth approached, and something flickered across her face. She'd heard. Of course she'd heard. Sound carried in this house, and Grace heard everything. Ruth sat down beside her. Your aunt is coming to visit. Grace's hand tightened on the cat's fur. She wants to take you to Denver, to live with her. The cat mewed in protest. Grace loosened her grip, but didn't speak. Grace, look at me. Those gray eyes lifted. Ruth saw fear there, deep drowning fear. Do you want to go with her? Violent shake of the head. Then you won't, I promise you. Grace's expression shifted to doubt. She'd been promised things before. Adults made promises they couldn't keep. Why should Ruth be any different? I know you don't trust easy, Ruth said quietly. I know everyone you've loved has left or died or disappointed you. But I need you to trust me now. Just a little. Just enough to fight for this. Grace pulled out her ever-present paper and pencil. Her hand shook as she wrote. She tried before. After Mama died, she said Papa was broken. Your papa was broken, but he's healing now. You're both healing. What if she takes me anyway? Ruth took Grace's hand. Then I'll come get you. I'll walk to Denver myself if I have to. I'll find you and bring you home. Grace stared at her. Promise. Promise. The girl threw herself into Ruth's arms, trembling. Ruth held her tight, feeling the rapid flutter of Grace's heart against her chest. We're going to fight this, Ruth whispered. Together. You, me, and your papa. Victoria Price doesn't stand a chance against the three of us. She hoped she sounded more confident than she felt. That night, after Grace was asleep, Ruth and Samuel sat at the kitchen table planning. We need to show her Grace is thriving, Ruth said. That means Grace needs to be present, engaged, participating in family life. Grace doesn't participate. She watches. She did before. She will again. Ruth leaned forward. These past weeks, she's been coming out of her shell. Small steps, but real ones. We need to accelerate that. How? We can't force her to talk. No, but we can give her reasons to try. Ruth hesitated. There's something I haven't told you, about how I came to be here. Samuel's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Ruth took a breath. This was a gamble, but they were past the point of secrets. There was no advertisement, Samuel. No job posting. Grace found me herself. She and Mrs. Chen arranged everything, the letter, the money for my passage, all of it. Samuel went very still. Grace has been looking for someone specific since Emma died. Ruth continued. Someone who wouldn't leave. Someone who understood what it meant to be alone. She read my application letter and decided I was the one. That's impossible. She's 7 years old. 7 years old and smarter than both of us combined. Ruth met his gaze. She's been fighting for this family since the day her mama died. Fighting in the only way she knew how. And now, Victoria is coming to take her away from everything she's fought for. Samuel's face had gone pale. Why didn't you tell me? Because Grace asked me not to. Because I didn't know how you'd react. Ruth reached across the table and touched his hand. But you need to know. You need to understand what your daughter is capable of. She's not a broken child, Samuel. She's a warrior. Samuel stared at their joined hands. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. Emma used to call her that. Little warrior. Said Grace came into the world fighting and never stopped. Then let's give her something to fight for. Let's show Victoria that this family is worth keeping together. Samuel nodded slowly. What do? We prepare. We make this house feel like a home. We show Victoria that Grace has everything she needs right here. Education, care, love. And most importantly, Ruth squeezed his hand. We show her that Grace has two people who will never, ever let her go. The next 5 days were a blur of preparation. Ruth cleaned the house until it gleamed. She hung new curtains, beat the rugs, polished every surface. She cooked meals that would make a Denver restaurant jealous, practicing until each dish was perfect. Samuel worked alongside her, mending what was broken, painting what was faded. He fixed the corral fence, straightened the barn door, cleared the weeds from Emma's grave. And Grace watched them both with growing wonder. On the second day, she started helping without being asked. On the third day, she set the table for meals, placing each fork and knife with careful precision. On the fourth day, she brought Ruth a wildflower and stood there until Ruth put it in a jar on the windowsill. It's perfect, Ruth said. Thank you. Grace's lips moved. No sound came out, but Ruth saw the shape of the words. You're welcome. Progress. Small, but real. The night before Victoria's arrival, Ruth found Samuel standing at Emma's grave, hat in hand, head bowed. She almost turned away. This was private, his grief, his goodbye. She had no right to intrude. But something made her stay. She'd be proud of you, Ruth said softly. Samuel didn't turn. Would she? You're fighting for your daughter. Fighting to keep this family together. That's what she would have wanted. I spent 18 months not fighting, not doing anything except feeling sorry for myself. His voice cracked. Grace needed me, and I wasn't there. You're here now. Is that enough? Ruth moved to stand beside him. The evening wind stirred the prairie grass, carrying the sweet smell of summer. When I was 14, she said quietly, my mother died giving birth to my brother. The baby died too. My father crawled into a whiskey bottle and never came out. Samuel turned to look at her. I spent 4 years watching him drink himself to death, hating him, begging him, trying everything I could think of to bring him back. Ruth's throat tightened. He died owing money to half of St. Louis. I had to sell everything we owned to pay his debts. That's when I went to work for the Morrisons. Ruth, what I'm saying is I understand. I understand what it's like to lose yourself in grief, to feel like there's no point in fighting when you've already lost everything that matters. She met his eyes. But you didn't lose everything, Samuel. You still have Grace, and she still has you. That's worth fighting for. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. What happened at the Morrisons? He asked. Why did you leave? Ruth's stomach clenched. She'd known this question was coming, had dreaded it. Their son, she said carefully. He had expectations of the help. Samuel's expression darkened. Did he hurt you? He tried. Ruth's hands curled into fists. I stopped him. How does it matter? It matters to me. Ruth looked away. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose. There was a letter opener on his desk. He grabbed me. I grabbed it. She forced the words out. I didn't kill him, but I marked him, badly. His family would have had me arrested, maybe hanged, so I ran. Silence stretched between them. That's why you came west, Samuel said finally. Not for a job, for escape. Yes. And Grace found you, chose you. Something shifted in his voice. A woman running from violence. A woman who understands what it means to fight for survival. Samuel, I'm glad she found you. He reached out and took her hand. I'm glad you're here. Whatever brought you, whatever you're running from, I'm glad. Ruth's eyes stung with tears she refused to shed. Victoria comes tomorrow, she said. We should get some sleep. But neither of them moved. They stood there in the fading light, hands joined, watching the first stars appear above the mountains. Victoria Price arrived at precisely 10 o'clock the next morning. Ruth heard the carriage before she saw it, fine wheels on the dirt road, horses with expensive tack. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window. The woman who stepped down from the carriage was everything Ruth had expected, and nothing like she'd imagined. Victoria was perhaps 45, with blonde hair going gray at the temples, arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken an hour to achieve. Her dress was deep burgundy, expensive fabric, expertly tailored. Her gloves were spotless white, but her face was tired, drawn, the face of a woman who had been grieving alone for a very long time. Ruth saw Emma in that face. The same bone structure, the same determined chin. Samuel stepped onto the porch. Ruth stayed behind him, and Grace pressed against Ruth's side, half hidden, but watching. Victoria? Samuel's voice was neutral. Samuel. Victoria's gaze swept over him, over the house, over Ruth. It stopped on Grace. Hello, sweetheart. Do you remember me? Grace didn't respond. Her fingers dug into Ruth's skirt. Of course you do. Victoria's smile was brittle. I'm your Aunt Victoria. I've come to take you to Denver. Won't that be nice? She's not going anywhere. Samuel's voice hardened. Now, Samuel, let's not be dramatic. Victoria climbed the porch steps. I've traveled a long way. The least you can do is offer me refreshment while we discuss this like civilized people. Ruth felt Grace trembling against her. She put a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. I'm Ruth Callahan, she said. The housekeeper. I'll make tea. Victoria's eyes flickered over Ruth, assessing, dismissing. Thank you, Miss Callahan. That would be lovely. They settled in the parlor, Samuel and Victoria in the chairs, Ruth serving tea, Grace perched on a stool in the corner like a frightened bird ready to fly. The house looks better than I expected, Victoria admitted. Cleaner, certainly. Miss Callahan has been a great help, Samuel said stiffly. I'm sure. Victoria's tone suggested she wasn't sure at all. How long has she been here? Nearly a month. A month. Victoria sipped her tea. The others barely lasted a week. What makes this one different? Perhaps you should ask Grace. Victoria turned to her niece, that brittle smile fixed in place. Well, Grace, do you like Miss Callahan? Grace's eyes darted to Ruth, then to her father, then back to Victoria. She nodded. She nods. Victoria set down her teacup. Samuel, the child, still doesn't speak, after 18 months. Doesn't that concern you? She's getting better. Getting better? She hasn't said a word since I arrived. She looks half-starved, pale as a ghost, and she's clearly terrified. She's not terrified. She's cautious. Cautious of her own aunt? Ruth stepped forward. Mrs. Price, if I may. You may not. Victoria didn't even look at her. This is a family matter, Miss Callahan. You're the help. The words were sharp, designed to cut. Ruth felt herself flush. But before she could respond, Grace moved. She slid off her stool and walked across the room. Not to her father, not to Victoria, to Ruth. She took Ruth's hand and held it tight. Victoria's eyes widened. Grace, come here. Her voice had lost some of its polish. Come to your aunt. Grace shook her head. Grace. Another head shake, firmer this time. Samuel, control your daughter. She's controlling herself, Samuel said quietly. She's making a choice, and she's choosing to stay with Ruth. Victoria's composure cracked. This is absurd. The child is 7 years old. She doesn't know what's best for her. She knows who loves her. Samuel stood. She knows who she trusts. And right now, that's not you, Victoria. How dare you? You came here once before, after Emma died. You told Grace that her father was broken, that he couldn't take care of her, that she'd be better off with you in Denver. Samuel's voice was steel now. Grace heard every word. She remembers. Victoria paled. You wondered why she stopped talking. Maybe she stopped because the people who were supposed to protect her kept tearing her world apart. I was trying to help. You were trying to take her away from everything she knew, from her home, from me. Samuel moved to stand beside Ruth and Grace. This is her family now. Me, Miss Callahan, this ranch. And we're not letting her go. Victoria stood, her face flushed with anger, and something else, hurt maybe, or guilt. Emma would be ashamed of you, she said, raising her daughter in this wilderness with a cook for a mother figure. Emma would be proud. Ruth spoke before she could stop herself. She'd be proud of Grace for fighting so hard. Proud of Samuel for not giving up. Proud of this family for choosing each other when it would have been easier to fall apart. And how would you know what Emma would think you never met her? Ruth reached into her pocket and pulled out Emma's letter, the one Grace had shown her in the mercantile. Emma wrote this for Grace before she died. She wrote about finding people whose hurt matches your own. People who stay not because they have to, but because they choose to. Ruth held the letter out. She wrote about rare people worth keeping. That's what Grace has been looking for since her mother died. That's why she chose me. Victoria stared at the letter. Her face had gone white. Where did you get that? Grace showed me. Because she trusts me. Victoria's hand trembled as she took the letter. She read it slowly, and Ruth watched the emotions cross her face. Recognition, grief, longing. Emma wrote this, Victoria whispered. This is her handwriting. Yes. She knew. She knew she was dying and she... Victoria's voice broke. She prepared Grace for losing her. She prepared Grace for finding new people to love, Ruth corrected gently. Not to replace Emma, but to add to the love she already had. Victoria looked at Grace, really looked at her maybe for the first time since arriving. Is this true? She asked softly. Did you choose Miss Callahan? Grace glanced at Ruth, then nodded. How? Grace pulled her paper and pencil from her pocket. She wrote slowly, carefully. I prayed for someone like Mama said. Someone who understands. God sent Ruth. Victoria read the words and pressed her hand to her mouth. Oh, Grace. She knelt down, bringing herself to the child's eye level. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry for trying to take you away. I thought I was doing the right thing. Emma was my baby sister. When she died, I felt like I lost everything. And you were all I had left of her. Grace studied her aunt's face. I wasn't trying to take you from your father. I was trying to hold on to Emma. Victoria's voice shook. That was wrong. I see that now. Grace wrote again. You miss her too. Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. Every single day. Grace stepped forward, slowly, cautiously. She reached out and touched Victoria's wet cheek. Then she leaned in and hugged her. Ruth felt tears burn her own eyes. Beside her, Samuel's breath caught. Victoria hugged Grace back, sobbing openly, now all her elegant composure shattered. I'm sorry, she kept saying. I'm so sorry. When they finally separated, Victoria looked at Samuel. I withdraw my claim, she said quietly. Entirely, permanently. Grace belongs here with you. Samuel nodded slowly. Thank you. But I would like... Victoria hesitated. Would it be possible for me to visit sometimes? To be part of her life? Not to take her away, just to know her? Samuel looked at Grace. Grace wrote, Can she come for Christmas? Ruth laughed through her tears. I think that's a yes. Victoria left that afternoon, but not before spending 2 hours sitting with Grace, looking through Emma's old photographs, sharing stories about their childhood together. Ruth watched them from the kitchen window, aunt and niece heads bent together, beginning to build something new from the ruins of loss. Samuel came to stand beside her. I thought it would be a battle, he said quietly. I thought we'd have to fight her in court. Instead, Grace did what she always does. She found a way through. Samuel shook his head in wonder. She showed Victoria Emma's letter, used her mother's own words to heal the rift between them. She's remarkable. She is. Samuel turned to look at Ruth. But she's not the only one. Ruth felt heat rise to her cheeks. I didn't do anything. Grace, you gave her courage. You showed her that trust was possible again. He stopped, his jaw working. You've changed everything, Ruth. This house, this family, me. Samuel. I know it's only been a month. I know there's things you haven't told me, things I haven't told you. But I need you to know something. Ruth's heart pounded. What? He reached out and took her hand. When you came here, I was dead inside, going through the motions, waiting to die so I could be with Emma again. His voice roughened. You brought me back to life, you and Grace together. And I don't know what that means yet, or where it goes from here, but I know I don't want to lose it. I don't want to lose you. Ruth stared at him. At his weathered face, his storm-gray eyes, the hope that flickered there like a candle in the dark. She thought about running, about St. Louis, about the Morrison boy, about all the reasons she should keep her distance. Then she thought about Grace's letter, about rare people worth keeping. I'm not going anywhere, she said softly. I promise. Samuel's hand tightened on hers. Outside, Grace waved goodbye to Victoria's departing carriage. And inside Ruth's chest, something that had been frozen for a very long time began finally to thaw. That night after supper, Grace did something she hadn't done in 18 months. She sat at the kitchen table, looked at her father, and opened her mouth. "Papa?" The word was rusty, barely a whisper, but it was there. Real, spoken aloud. Samuel dropped his fork. His face crumpled. "Grace." His voice cracked. "Did you just—" "Papa," she said again, stronger this time. "I love you." Samuel was out of his chair before Ruth could blink. He swept Grace into his arms, holding her like she might disappear. "I love you too, little bird. I love you so much. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't—" "It's okay, Papa." Grace's small hand patted his back. "You're here now." Ruth watched them, tears streaming down her face. This was what healing looked like. Not a sudden transformation, but small, brave choices made again and again. A letter passed between strangers. A peppermint offered in peace. A word spoken after 18 months of silence. Grace looked over her father's shoulder and met Ruth's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying." Ruth smiled through her tears. "Thank you for choosing me." The days after Victoria's departure settled into something Ruth had never known before: peace. Grace talked now. Not constantly, not easily, but she talked. Small sentences at first. "Good morning, Ruth." "Papa, can I help?" "The bread smells good." Each word was a gift carefully offered, gratefully received. Samuel changed too. The frozen grief that had encased him began to crack and fall away. He laughed at supper. He told stories about Emma without breaking. He called Grace "little bird" and watched her face light up instead of flinch. And Ruth found herself falling in love with both of them. She tried to stop it. Told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. Told herself she was the help, the cook, the woman who had no business wanting things she couldn't have. But every time Samuel's hand brushed hers, every time Grace climbed into her lap for a story, every time the three of them sat together at the kitchen table, like they belonged there, Ruth's heart forgot to listen. 3 weeks after Victoria's visit, Samuel rode to town for supplies. Ruth stayed behind with Grace, both of them busy in the kitchen, making preserves from the summer berries Grace had picked that morning. "Ruth." Grace stirred the bubbling pot carefully. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you going to marry Papa?" Ruth nearly dropped her ladle. "What?" "He looks at you different. Like he used to look at Mama. And you look at him the same way." Grace's gray eyes were matter-of-fact. "So are you going to marry him?" "Grace, it's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I'm running from something. Because your Papa deserves better than a woman with blood on her hands. Because if he knew the truth, he might send me away. Because marriage is a big decision," Ruth said carefully. "It takes time." "How much time?" "I don't know, sweetheart." Grace considered this. "Mama used to say life is short. She said you shouldn't waste time being scared of good things." Ruth's throat tightened. "Your mama was wise." "I know." Grace went back to stirring. "I think she'd want you to marry Papa. I think she'd be happy we found you." Before Ruth could respond, they heard it hoofbeats on the road. Fast. Too fast. Ruth moved to the window. Her heart stopped. It wasn't Samuel's horse. A man was riding toward the house at full gallop. Behind him, a second rider. And behind them, a wagon with the word "Sheriff" painted on the side. Ruth's blood turned to ice. "Grace." Her voice came out steady, though her hands shook. "Go upstairs. Now." "But—" "Now, Grace. Don't come down until I call for you." Something in Ruth's tone must have frightened the girl. She ran for the stairs without another word. Ruth watched her go, then turned back to the window. The riders were closer now. She could see the first man's face, young early 20s, with a cruel mouth and a scar running from his eye to his jaw. A scar she had put there. Thomas Morrison had found her. Ruth's mind raced. She could run. Out the back across the prairie, disappear before they reached the door. She'd done it before. She could do it again. But Grace was upstairs. Grace who had chosen her. Grace who trusted her. And Samuel would come home to find her gone. No explanation. No goodbye. Just another woman who left without a word. No. She was done running. Ruth smoothed her dress, lifted her chin, and opened the front door. Thomas Morrison pulled his horse to a stop 10 feet from the porch. The sheriff and his deputy flanked him, their faces grim. "Miss Callahan," Thomas's voice dripped with satisfaction. "Or should I say the woman who tried to murder me? I defended myself against assault. There's a difference." "Is that what you call it?" He swung down from his horse, landing heavily. The scar on his face was livid, puckered, a permanent reminder of that night. "You disfigured me. You ruined my life. And then you ran like the coward you are." "I ran because your family would have seen me hanged. And they still will." Thomas gestured to the sheriff. "This woman is a fugitive from justice. She attacked me with a deadly weapon and fled across state lines. I have a warrant for her arrest." The sheriff stepped forward, a man in his 50s with tired eyes and a weary expression. "Ma'am, I'm Sheriff Daniels from St. Louis. I'm afraid I have to ask you to come with us." Ruth's heart pounded, but she kept her voice calm. "On what charge?" "Attempted murder." "That's a lie, and everyone knows it." "That's for the courts to decide." Sheriff Daniels pulled out a pair of iron cuffs. "Please don't make this difficult." Ruth looked at the cuffs, at Thomas's triumphant smile, at the wagon waiting to take her back to St. Louis to trial, to prison, or worse. "Ruth," Grace's voice, small and terrified. Ruth spun around. Grace stood in the doorway, her face white, her eyes huge. "Go back inside, Grace." "What's happening? Who are these men?" "Grace, please." "Is that the child?" Thomas's interest sharpened. "Thornton's girl, the one who doesn't talk. Leave her out of this." "Why?" Thomas stepped closer to the porch. "Maybe she'd like to know who's been caring for her. A violent criminal. A woman who sliced open a man's face and left him bleeding." "I said leave her alone. Did she tell you what she did, little girl?" Thomas crouched down, that cruel smile fixed on Grace. "Did she tell you she's a monster?" Grace looked at Ruth. Her gray eyes were full of questions, but not fear. Not yet. "Ruth saved herself," Grace said quietly. "That's not the same as being a monster." Thomas's smile faltered. "What?" "Mama told me. She said sometimes people do bad things and call it love. She said if someone hurts you, you have the right to make them stop." Grace's chin lifted. "Ruth made you stop. That means you were hurting her first." Ruth's eyes burned with tears. Thomas's face twisted with rage. He lunged toward Grace. And Ruth was there, putting herself between them, shoving Thomas back with all her strength. "Touch her, and I'll finish what I started." Thomas stumbled, caught himself, his eyes blazing. "You heard her, Sheriff. She just threatened me." "She's protecting a child from a man with violence in his eyes." A new voice, cold as steel. "Any fool can see that." Samuel. He rode up from the road, his horse lathered from hard running. Someone in town must have warned him. He dismounted before the horse fully stopped, putting himself beside Ruth, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "This is private property," Samuel said. "State your business and get off my land." Sheriff Daniels stepped forward. "Mr. Thornton, I presume I'm here to arrest Miss Callahan on charges of attempted murder. I have a warrant." "Let me see it." The sheriff handed over the paper. Samuel read it slowly, his expression unreadable. "This warrant is from Missouri," he said finally. "We're in Montana territory. You have no jurisdiction here. We have an extradition agreement, which requires review by a territorial judge before any arrest can be made." Samuel folded the warrant and tucked it into his pocket. "Until that review happens, Miss Callahan stays here. Now see here." Thomas started forward. Samuel's hand moved to his pistol. The motion was casual, almost lazy, but the threat was clear. "I spent 5 years as a Texas Ranger, Mr. Morrison. I know the law better than most, and I know when a man is trying to use it for revenge instead of justice." Thomas went pale. "You can't protect her forever." "I can protect her today. That's enough for now." Samuel nodded toward the road. "Leave. All of you. Come back with a proper territorial warrant and we'll talk. Until then, you're trespassing." Sheriff Daniels looked uncertain. Thomas looked furious. "This isn't over," Thomas spat. "She'll hang for what she did to me." "Maybe." Samuel's voice was ice. "Or maybe a judge will hear her side of the story. Her about the young man who assaulted a servant in his father's house. About the woman who defended herself the only way she could. About the family who tried to cover it up with money and influence." Thomas's face went red, then white. "How do you—" "I sent a telegram to St. Louis 2 weeks ago, made some inquiries. Amazing what people will tell you when you know the right questions to ask." Samuel stepped forward. "3 other women, Morrison. 3 others who weren't as lucky as Ruth, who didn't fight back, who suffered in silence because your family paid them to stay quiet." Ruth stared at Samuel. He'd known. All this time he'd known, and he'd been gathering evidence to protect her. "That's slander," Thomas hissed. "That's the truth. And if you pursue this, I'll make sure every newspaper from here to Washington hears about it." Samuel's hand tightened on his pistol. "Now get off my land before I forget I'm not a ranger anymore." Sheriff Daniels grabbed Thomas's arm. "Let's go," he said quietly. "This needs to go through proper channels." Thomas shook him off, his eyes burning into Ruth's. "This isn't over," he repeated. "I'll see you in chains if it's the last thing I do." He mounted his horse and rode away, the sheriff and deputy following. Ruth watched them go, her whole body trembling. "Papa." Grace's small voice cut through the tension. She was still standing in the doorway, her face pale, but determined. Samuel crossed to her in 3 strides and swept her into his arms. "It's all right, little bird. They're gone. They wanted to take Ruth away. I know, but they can't. Not without a proper warrant. Not without a fair hearing." He looked over Grace's head at Ruth. "And even then they'll have to go through me." Ruth's knees gave out. She sank onto the porch steps, shaking. Samuel set Grace down and crouched beside Ruth. "Hey." His voice was gentle. "Look at me." She couldn't face him now that he knew everything. "Ruth, look at me." She raised her eyes. His face was close, his expression fierce with something she couldn't name. "I don't care what you did in St. Louis. I don't care about Morrison or his warrant or any of it. All I care about is that you're here, that you're safe, and that you're not going anywhere." "Samuel." "I mean it." He took her hands, holding them tight. "When I sent that telegram, I wasn't looking for reasons to send you away. I was looking for ways to keep you." "Why?" "Because Grace needs you. Because this family needs you." He paused, his jaw working. "Because I need you." Ruth's breath caught. "I know it's only been 6 weeks. I know there's 100 reasons this is crazy. But Ruth—" His voice roughened. "I've spent 18 months dead inside. You brought me back to life. You and Grace together. And I'm not willing to lose that. Not for Morrison. Not for anyone. Samuel, if they come back with a proper warrant, then we'll fight it. Together. I'll hire lawyers, call in favors, do whatever it takes." His grip tightened. "I was a Texas Ranger for 5 years. I have connections. I have resources. And I have something Morrison doesn't have." "What's that?" The truth. Grace appeared beside them, her small hand touching Ruth's shoulder. "Don't leave," she whispered. "Please don't leave." Ruth looked at this child who had chosen her, at this man who was willing to fight for her, at this family she had somehow impossibly become part of. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I promise." Grace threw her arms around Ruth's neck. Samuel's hand came up to cup Ruth's face, his thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. "We're in this together," he said. "Whatever comes, together." Ruth nodded, unable to speak. And sitting there on that porch, with Grace's arms around her neck and Samuel's hand warm against her cheek, she finally understood what Emma had meant. Some people are worth keeping. Some families are worth fighting for. This was hers. The next 2 weeks were tense. Samuel sent telegrams daily to lawyers in Denver, to former Ranger colleagues in Texas, to anyone who might help build a case for Ruth's defense. He rode to town every other day, checking for news-gathering information, preparing for battle. Ruth threw herself into work. Cooking, cleaning, teaching Grace her letters, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. But every time a rider appeared on the road, her heart stopped. Every time a wagon creaked past, she held her breath. Grace stayed close, closer than ever. She followed Ruth from room to room, helped with every task, slept with her door open, so she could hear if Ruth tried to leave in the night. "I'm not going anywhere," Ruth told her again and again. "I promised." "I know." Grace's gray eyes were old, too old. But promises get broken sometimes, even when people don't mean to break them. Ruth pulled her close. "Not this promise. Not ever." On the 15th day, Samuel came home from town with news. Ruth was hanging laundry when she heard his horse. She knew immediately something had changed. His posture was different, straighter, lighter somehow. She met him at the porch, Grace right behind her. "What happened?" Samuel dismounted, and Ruth saw he was smiling. Actually smiling. "It's over." "What?" "Morrison dropped the charges, all of them. Withdrew the warrant completely." Ruth's knees went weak. "How? Why?" "Turns out my inquiries stirred up more than I expected. One of the other women, one of Morrison's other victims, she came forward, told her story to a newspaper in St. Louis. Once that story broke, 2 more women came forward. The Morrison family is facing scandal on a scale they never imagined." Ruth pressed her hand to her mouth. "Thomas Morrison was quietly shipped off to Europe this morning. His family's hoping distance will make people forget. They're certainly not going to pursue charges against you now. That would only bring more attention to everything they're trying to hide." "It's really over." Ruth's voice shook. "He's really gone. He's really gone." Samuel took her hands. "You're free, Ruth. Completely free." Grace let out a whoop and threw herself at both of them, and suddenly they were all three embracing, laughing, crying, the tension of 2 weeks finally breaking. "I told you," Samuel said into Ruth's hair. "I told you we'd fight it together. You did more than fight. You saved me." "No." He pulled back, his eyes bright. "You saved yourself, Ruth. You survived, you fought back, you came west and started over. All I did was make sure the past couldn't drag you back down." Ruth looked at him, really looked at this man who had been a stranger 2 months ago, who had trusted her with his daughter, who had dug into her past not to judge her, but to protect her. "Samuel." "Yes, ask me." He went still. "Ask you what? What you've been wanting to ask for weeks. What Grace already asked me in the kitchen." Ruth's heart pounded. "Ask me." Understanding dawned in his eyes, and fear, and hope. "Ruth Callahan." His voice was rough. "Will you marry me?" Grace gasped. Ruth smiled through her tears. "Yes. Yes, Samuel Thornton. I'll marry you." Grace screamed with joy and jumped up and down. Samuel let out a breath like he'd been holding it for years and pulled Ruth close. "I know it's fast," he murmured against her hair. "I know we barely know each other. I know you." Ruth pulled back to look at him. I know you're kind and brave and stubborn. I know you love your daughter more than life. I know you'd fight for the people you care about, even when it costs you. She touched his face. What else do I need to know? That I love you. The words came out raw, unpolished. I didn't think I could again. After Emma. But I do. I love you, Ruth. I love you too. He kissed her, then right there in front of God and Grace and the whole Montana prairie. A kiss that tasted like promise and future and home. Grace tugged on Ruth's skirt. Does this mean you're going to be my mama now? Ruth crouched down to look into those gray eyes. Emma's eyes, Samuel's eyes that had seen too much loss and too much pain, but still held room for hope. If you want me to be. I do. Grace threw her arms around Ruth's neck. I chose you. Remember, I chose you to be ours. Yes, you did. Ruth held her tight. And I chose you right back. They were married 3 weeks later on a bright August morning. It was a small ceremony, just family and a few friends. Mrs. Chen stood as witness, her weathered face bright with joy. Victoria came from Denver, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched her niece stand beside the woman she'd chosen. Grace carried wildflowers and recited a poem she'd written herself about finding treasure in unexpected places. And when Samuel kissed his bride, the gathered witnesses cheered, and Grace proclaimed it the best day in the history of the whole world. That night, after the guests had gone and Grace had finally fallen asleep, Ruth and Samuel sat on the porch, watching stars appear. Mrs. Thornton. Samuel tested the name. I like how that sounds. So do I. Ruth leaned against his shoulder. Thank you. For what? For fighting for me. For believing in me. For giving me something I never thought I'd have. A husband. A home. Ruth's throat tightened. I've been running my whole life, Samuel. From my father. From St. Louis. From Morrison. Always running, never stopping, never belonging anywhere. And then Grace found me and you. She stopped, overwhelmed. And now you're done running. Samuel finished quietly. Now, I'm done running. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. I should tell you something. What? I wasn't sure about you at first. When you arrived, this woman I'd never met with secrets in her eyes and walls around her heart, I thought you'd be like the others, that you'd leave as soon as things got hard. What changed your mind? Samuel was quiet for a moment. The first week I came downstairs one night for water. It was late, 2, maybe 3 in the morning, and I heard your voice. Ruth frowned. I don't remember. You were talking to Grace. She'd had a nightmare and you were sitting beside her bed telling her a story, something about a mermaid and a shipwreck. Ruth remembered now, Grace's small hand clutching hers in the darkness. You stayed with her for 2 hours, Samuel continued, until she fell back asleep. And when you finally left her room, you stopped at my door. His voice roughened. You pressed your hand against the wood and whispered something. Ruth's face flushed. She remembered that too. What did I say? You said, hold on. Both of you, just hold on. I'm not going anywhere. Tears spilled down Ruth's cheeks. That's when I knew, Samuel said. That's when I knew you were different. That you weren't here for a job or money or even escape. You were here because somehow, impossibly, you cared. I did care. I do. I know. He turned her face toward his. And that's why I love you. Not because you cook or clean or help with Grace. Because you care. Because you choose to stay. Every day, you choose us. Every day, Ruth agreed. For the rest of my life. He kissed her slow and deep under the vast Montana sky. And inside the house, unseen by either of them, Grace stood at her window watching her parents together. She pulled Emma's letter from under her pillow, the words she'd read 100 times, the promise her mother had made her before she died. When you find that person, Grace, hold on tight. They're the rare ones. They're the ones worth keeping. Grace smiled. I found her mama, she whispered to the stars. Just like you said, I found her and she's staying. She climbed back into bed, tucking the letter safe under her pillow. And for the first time in 18 months, Grace Thornton slept without a single nightmare. 1 year later, Ruth stood in the kitchen of Thornton Ranch Flour, dusting her apron, watching Grace help Samuel bring in the harvest. So much had changed. Grace was 8 now, taller, stronger, her voice sure and clear. She attended school in town 3 days a week, made friends easily, laughed often. The silence that had gripped her was just a memory now, one they rarely spoke of except to marvel at how far she'd come. Victoria visited regularly, bringing gifts from Denver and stories about society life that made Grace giggle. The rift between her and Samuel had healed slowly but truly. They would never be close friends, but they were family bound together by love for the same woman, commitment to the same child. And Samuel was a different man than the frozen stranger Ruth had met on that porch a year ago. He smiled now, laughed, pulled Ruth into his arms for no reason at all except that he wanted her close. They were building something together, a life, a future, a family. Ruth pressed her hand to her stomach and smiled. Ruth! Grace burst through the door, cheeks flushed from the summer heat. Papa says dinner smells good enough to eat a horse. Can we eat now? I'm starving. In a minute. I need to tell you both something first. Samuel appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands, his face questioning. Everything all right? Ruth took a breath. She'd been waiting for the right moment all week. More than all right. She crossed to them, taking Grace's hand and Samuel's hand. I have news. What kind of news? Grace bounced on her toes. Good news. Is it about Christmas? Aunt Victoria promised to bring that doll from the Denver shop. Better than Christmas. Ruth smiled, her heart full to bursting. Grace, how would you feel about being a big sister? The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Grace screamed, throwing herself at Ruth, nearly knocking her over. A baby! We're having a baby! When is it a girl? Can I name her? Can she sleep in my room? Samuel stood frozen, his face pale. Samuel. Ruth reached for him, suddenly worried. Are you? He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet. A baby, he breathed. Ruth, a baby. Are you happy? Happy. He laughed, a sound of pure, unfiltered joy. I'm terrified, and amazed, and grateful. He set her down, cupping her face in his hands. And so completely in love with you, I don't have words for it. Grace wiggled between them, one arm around Ruth, one arm around Samuel. We're going to be 4, she announced. A real family. Mama, Papa, me, and baby. That's the best number. Ruth stroked her hair. You're okay with sharing us? I'm the one who found you. Remember, I'm the one who chose. Grace grinned. I'm just going to keep choosing. That's what families do. Samuel met Ruth's eyes over their daughter's head. That's what families do, he echoed softly. And standing there in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and summer heat, Ruth finally understood the truth she'd been running from her whole life. Family wasn't about blood. It wasn't about obligation or duty or even love, though love was part of it. Family was about choice. The choice to stay when leaving was easier. The choice to trust when doubt was safer. The choice to open your heart again and again, even when it had been broken before. Grace had taught her that. A 7-year-old girl who refused to give up hope. Who searched for exactly the right person and found her. Who chose to build a family out of broken pieces and desperate strangers. Some families are born. Some are made. And some, the very best ones, are chosen. By the bravest hearts of all. The months that followed Ruth's announcement were the happiest the Thornton Ranch had ever known. Grace threw herself into preparing for the baby with the same fierce determination she'd shown in finding Ruth. She helped sew tiny clothes, painted a wooden cradle Samuel built in the barn, and spent hours choosing names from a book Mrs. Chen had given her. "What about Emma?" Grace asked one evening, her pencil poised over a long list of possibilities. "If it's a girl, we could name her after Mama." Ruth looked at Samuel, uncertain. "That's a beautiful thought, little bird," Samuel said carefully. "But maybe the baby should have her own name, something new." Grace considered this. "What about Hope? Because that's what Ruth gave us." Hope. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "Hope Thornton. I love it." "And if it's a boy?" Samuel asked. "Then we'll name him after someone brave." Grace tapped her pencil against her chin. "Someone who fought for what was right." "Like who?" Grace looked at her father with those ancient knowing eyes. "Like you, Papa, Samuel Jr." Samuel's throat worked. He pulled Grace into his arms and held her tight. "You're too wise for 8 years old," he said roughly. "You know that. I know." Grace grinned against his chest. "Ruth tells me all the time." Winter came early that year, bringing snow that piled high against the windows and wind that howled through the nights. But inside the ranch house, warmth prevailed, fires burning in every hearth, Ruth's cooking filling the air with comfort, and Grace's laughter echoing through rooms that had once held only silence. Ruth grew round with the baby. Samuel watched her with a mixture of joy and terror that he couldn't quite hide. "Stop looking at me like that," Ruth said one evening, catching him staring. "Like what?" "Like I might break." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Emma." "I'm not Emma." Ruth crossed to him, taking his hands. "I'm healthy. The baby's healthy. The doctor said everything looks fine." "The doctor said the same thing about Emma." There it was. The fear he'd been carrying since she'd told him about the pregnancy. The shadow that darkened his eyes every time she winced or rubbed her back or moved too slowly. "Samuel." Ruth cupped his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I can't promise nothing will go wrong. No one can promise that. But I can promise that I'm not going anywhere without a fight. I didn't survive St. Louis and Morrison and everything else just to give up now. I can't lose you." His voice cracked. "I can't do this again, Ruth. I can't." "You won't." She kissed him softly. "I'm too stubborn to die. Ask anyone." He laughed despite himself, a broken sound halfway between hope and despair. "Grace gets that from you," he said. "Grace was stubborn long before I got here. She gets it from both her parents." Ruth smiled. "Now stop worrying and come help me with supper. The potatoes won't peel themselves." But late that night, when Samuel was asleep, Ruth lay awake, her hand on her swollen belly. "Please," she prayed silently. "Please let us be okay. This family has lost enough. Please give us this one thing." The baby kicked in response, strong, insistent, alive. Ruth smiled and closed her eyes. Christmas arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and visitors from town. Victoria came from Denver laden with gifts, a silk dress for Ruth, books for Grace, fine tobacco for Samuel. Mrs. Chen brought preserved fruits and a hand-knitted blanket for the baby. Even Sheriff Morrison, no relation to Thomas, thankfully stopped by with his wife to pay respects. "Heard about your trouble last summer," he said quietly to Samuel. "That Morrison boy was bad news. Glad it all worked out." "So am I," Samuel said. "So am I." Grace played hostess with surprising skill, offering tea and cookies, making conversation with adults twice her age. Ruth watched her with pride swelling in her chest. "She's remarkable," Victoria said, coming to stand beside Ruth. "So different from the silent child I met last year." "She was always remarkable. She just needed permission to show it." "You gave her that." Victoria's voice softened. "You gave all of them permission to live again, to love again." Ruth shook her head. "Grace gave that to herself, to all of us. She's the one who refused to give up." "She chose well." Victoria met Ruth's eyes. When she chose you, I mean. She chose exactly right. Coming from Victoria, the words meant more than Ruth could say. Thank you for accepting us, for being part of this family. Thank you for letting me. Victoria's smile was sad but genuine. Emma would have loved you, Ruth. She would have loved seeing Grace so happy, seeing Samuel alive again. I hope so. I know so. Victoria squeezed her hand. I knew my sister better than anyone, and I know she's watching over this family wherever she is. I know she's grateful for what you've built here. Ruth blinked back tears. Mama. Grace bounded over, interrupting the moment. Papa's telling Sheriff Morrison about the time you chased a bear out of the chicken coop with a broom. Is that true? Mostly true. It was a small bear. And you weren't scared at all. I was terrified, but the chickens were more scared than me. Grace laughed and dragged Ruth over to hear the rest of the story. And the Christmas celebration continued, full of noise and warmth and the simple joy of people who had chosen to be family. February brought the first signs of spring and the first signs of trouble. Ruth woke one morning to a strange feeling in her belly. Not the baby's usual kicks and rolls. Something different. A tightening. A pressure. She lay still, waiting. Counting. The feeling came again. Stronger this time. Samuel. She shook him awake. Samuel, I think it's time. He was on his feet before she finished speaking, pulling on clothes with shaking hands. It's too early, the doctor said, March. The baby doesn't care what the doctor said. Ruth gasped as another contraction hit. Go, get Mrs. Chen. She's delivered more babies than any doctor. I'm not leaving you alone. Grace is here. I won't be alone. Ruth gripped his hand. Go, Samuel, please, I need her. He pressed a fierce kiss to her forehead and ran. Grace appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Ruth, is the baby coming? Yes, sweetheart, come here. Grace climbed onto the bed and took Ruth's hand. Are you scared? She whispered. A little, but I'm also excited. We're about to meet the newest member of our family. What if something goes wrong? Ruth looked into those gray eyes. Emma's eyes, Samuel's eyes, and saw the old fear lurking there. Grace remembered. Of course she remembered. The last time a baby came to this house, she'd lost her mother. Listen to me. Ruth squeezed her hand. I am not going anywhere. Do you hear me? I promised you I would stay, and I meant it. This baby is coming, and I am going to be here to raise her alongside you. How do you know it's a her? Mother's intuition. Ruth smiled through another contraction. Also, she kicks like you do. Strong and stubborn. Grace almost smiled. Almost. I'm scared, she admitted. I know. That's okay. Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you care enough to worry. Ruth stroked her hair. Will you stay with me until Mrs. Chen gets here? Will you be brave with me? Grace nodded fiercely. I'll stay, I promise. That's my girl. Mrs. Chen arrived within the hour, Samuel right behind her. The older woman took one look at Ruth and began issuing orders. Hot water, clean cloths, Samuel out. This is women's work. I'm not leaving. Yes, you are. Ruth's voice was firm despite the pain. Take Grace downstairs. Make her tea. Keep each other company. I'll call you when it is time. Samuel looked like he wanted to argue. His face was white, his hands trembling. Go, Ruth said softly. Trust me. Trust Mrs. Chen. We know what we're doing. He went, taking Grace with him. Mrs. Chen closed the door and turned to Ruth. Now, let's bring this baby into the world. The hours that followed were the longest of Ruth's life. The pain came in waves, building, cresting, releasing, building again. Mrs. Chen talked her through each contraction, her voice calm and steady. You're doing fine. The baby's in the right position. Everything's moving like it should. Is it always this hard? Every birth is hard. But every birth is also a miracle. Mrs. Chen pressed a cool cloth to Ruth's forehead. Your body knows what to do. Trust it. Ruth tried. She breathed and pushed and rested and pushed again, her whole world narrowing to this room, this bed, this moment. Somewhere below, she could hear Samuel pacing. Hear Grace's voice high and worried, asking questions he probably couldn't answer. Hold on, she thought. Both of you hold on. I'm coming back to you, I promise. As dawn broke over the mountains, Ruth felt something shift. That's it? Mrs. Chen said, her voice suddenly urgent. One more push. Give me everything you've got. Ruth gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed. And then a cry. High, thin, miraculous. The sound of new life entering the world. Ruth collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing with relief. A girl! Mrs. Chen announced, her weathered face split with a grin. A perfect, healthy girl. She placed the baby in Ruth's arms, tiny, red-faced, squalling with indignation at being pushed into the cold world. Ruth looked at her daughter and felt her heart crack open in a whole new way. Hello, Hope, she whispered. I've been waiting for you. The door burst open. Samuel stood there. Grace pressed against his side, both of them wild-eyed with fear. Then they saw Ruth, saw the baby in her arms, saw Ruth's exhausted, radiant smile. Come meet your daughter, Ruth said. Samuel crossed the room in 3 strides. He stopped at the bedside, staring at the tiny bundle like he'd never seen anything so precious or so terrifying. She's so small, he breathed. She won't be for long. Ruth held the baby up. Do you want to hold her? His hands shook as he took his daughter. The baby stopped crying immediately, settling against his chest like she'd always belonged there. Samuel's face crumpled. She's perfect, he choked out. Ruth, she's perfect. Of course she is. She's ours. Grace pressed against Ruth's side, peering at her new sister. She's really okay. You're really okay. We're both fine. Better than fine. Ruth pulled Grace close. You did so well, sweetheart. You stayed brave just like you promised. I told Papa you'd be okay. I told him you were too stubborn to leave us. Ruth laughed, tears streaming down her face. You were right, I am. They stayed like that for a long moment, the 4 of them together. A family built from broken pieces, held together by choice and courage, and a love too stubborn to give up. Thank you, Samuel said quietly. For what? For surviving. For giving us hope. He looked at Ruth with everything he felt written across his face. For choosing to stay. Thank you for giving me somewhere to stay. Ruth touched his cheek. Thank you for fighting for me. For believing in me. For building this life with me. I'd do it again. 100 times. 1,000. I know. She smiled. That's why I love you. He leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. I love you too, Mrs. Thornton, more than I ever thought possible. Grace cleared her throat loudly. Can I hold her now? Please. Samuel carefully transferred the baby to Grace's arms, showing her how to support the head. Grace looked down at her sister with wonder. Hi, Hope. I'm Grace. I'm your big sister. Her voice was serious, reverent. I'm going to teach you everything. How to ride horses and make bread and find the best berries in summer. And when you're bigger, I'll tell you the story of how our family got made. What story is that? Ruth asked softly. The story of a mama who sent a message from heaven, and a papa who was too sad to see the light, and a little girl who refused to give up hope. Grace looked up, her eyes bright. And a cook who wasn't supposed to be here but came anyway, because sometimes the best families aren't born. They're chosen. Ruth couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight, her heart too full. Samuel sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Ruth, his hand resting on Grace's shoulder. That's a good story, little bird. It's a true story. The best stories always are. Hope yawned, tiny fists waving in the air. I think she likes it too, Grace announced. I think she knows she's part of the story now. She is, Ruth agreed. The newest chapter. The best chapter. What happens next? Ruth looked at her family. Her husband with his storm-gray eyes and scarred hands. Her daughter with her fierce heart and brave soul. Her baby with her whole life stretching ahead of her. Whatever we choose, she said. That's the beauty of it. We get to choose what happens next, every single day. Then I choose this, Grace declared. I choose us, all of us, forever. Forever, Samuel echoed. Ruth pulled them all close, breathing in the scent of new baby and summer dust and home. Forever, she whispered. I choose forever. 2 years later, Ruth stood at the edge of the porch watching Grace teach Hope to walk. The toddler's legs were still wobbly, but she was determined, just like her sister, just like her mother. Every time she fell, she got back up. Every time she stumbled, Grace was there to catch her. That's it, Hope, you're doing so good. Samuel came to stand beside Ruth, slipping his arm around her waist. She's got your stubbornness, he said. She's got your fearlessness. Lord help us all. Ruth laughed and leaned into him. So much had changed in 2 years. The ranch had grown more cattle, more horses, a new barn. Victoria visited 3 times a year now, staying for weeks at a time, spoiling both granddaughters with gifts and stories. Mrs. Chen had become part of their extended family, celebrating every holiday, every birthday, every ordinary Sunday dinner. And the ghosts that had haunted this house. Emma's absence, Samuel's grief, Grace's silence had faded into memory. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but transformed. Part of the foundation, instead of the walls. Ruth. Samuel's voice was quiet. Do you ever think about what would have happened if Grace hadn't found you? Ruth considered the question. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about who I would have become, where I would have ended up. And I thank God for your daughter. Ruth smiled. For her stubbornness, her determination, her refusal to accept anything less than exactly what she wanted. She wanted you. She wanted hope. I just happened to be the form it took. Samuel turned her to face him. You're more than that. You know that, right? You're not just what Grace needed or what I needed. You're Ruth, yourself. Complete. Ruth's eyes stung. It took me a long time to believe that. A lifetime of running, of hiding, of being less than. And then I came here, and your daughter looked at me and saw someone worth keeping. Someone worth fighting for. She touched his face. That's when I started to believe it too. Good. He kissed her forehead. Because it's true. It's always been true. Mama, Papa, look. They turned to see Hope take 3 shaky steps on her own, Grace beaming beside her. She did it, Grace cheered. She walked all by herself. Hope toppled into Grace's arms, giggling. Ruth and Samuel exchanged looks of pure joy. Come on. Ruth took his hand. Let's go celebrate with our girls. They walked across the yard together, the Montana sun warm on their faces, their daughter's laughter ringing in the air. And Ruth Callahan. Ruth Thornton, now Ruth, who had been running her whole life, finally stopped. Not because she was tired, not because she'd run out of places to go, because she'd found the place she wanted to stay. That evening, after the girls were in bed and the house was quiet, Ruth sat at the kitchen table with Emma's letter in her hands. She'd read it dozens of times now, memorizing every word, every loop of handwriting, every bit of wisdom Emma had left behind for her daughter. When you find that person, Grace, hold on tight. They're the rare ones. They're the ones worth keeping. Ruth folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. Grace had found her. Against all odds, across hundreds of miles, a 7-year-old girl had searched for exactly the right person and found her. But Ruth knew now that she'd been searching too. Running, yes, but also searching for safety, for belonging, for a place to put down roots and grow. They'd found each other. Two broken people reaching across the darkness, choosing to believe that family wasn't about blood or obligation, but about the daily decision to show up, to stay, to love. Samuel appeared in the doorway. "You coming to bed?" "In a minute." Ruth looked up at him. "I was just thinking." "About what?" "About Grace. About the day she chose me. About how different everything would be if she'd chosen someone else." Samuel crossed to her, pulling out a chair. "She couldn't have chosen someone else. Don't you see that yet?" He took her hands. "Grace didn't just pick a name off a list. She found the one person in the world who matched us, who fit the empty spaces we didn't know we had. That's not luck. That's something bigger. Divine intervention. Maybe. Or maybe just a little girl who loved her mama so much she refused to let their family die." Samuel squeezed her hands. "Either way, I'm grateful. Every single day I'm grateful." Ruth stood and let him pull her into his arms. "I love you, Samuel Thornton." "I love you too, Ruth Thornton. Today and tomorrow and every day after." They stood there in the quiet kitchen holding each other while the Montana stars wheeled overhead and their daughters slept peacefully upstairs. A family built from broken pieces, held together by love and stubbornness and hope. Some families are born, some are made, and some, the very best ones, are chosen. By a little girl who refused to give up. By a woman who finally stopped running. By a man who learned to love again. By a baby named Hope. Ruth closed her eyes and smiled. This was her story. This was her family. This was her home. And she was never letting go. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever.